Hello and welcome to another edition of the Scoutcast, which is here to help fantasy managers amid the current COVID-19 lockdown. Today we'll be getting some top tips from the very best FPL managers out there. My name is Joe.
My name is Andy.
My name's David.
Excellent. Welcome everyone. Andy, what's on the show?
Yeah, I was going to say, when you say best FPL manager, we should say that we're going to talk about what they've said.
Yeah.
So that we can't, at least me
Felt
and
the
David.
pressure there.
It's not us.
Exactly.
We're talking about the best FPL managers.
Yeah. So, I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this have already seen, you, Joe, have been interviewing some of those best managers we've mentioned or will mention over the last couple of years through the Meet the Manager series. So in this one, basically, we've gone through, or we're going to go through, some of the top tips that the top managers have given, basically, given our thoughts. Maybe there's some cases where I not necessarily don't agree, but there's some things to think about even with those tips themselves, and just think about things we can learn. And then at the end, as always, we're going to go through virtual FPL plans pretty quickly.
Yes, indeed. And I think what I've recently been doing with these virtual FPL chats as well, I think all of us have been applying that to real FPL, if FPL is real, to real fantasy Premier League, because I'm personally learning all the way through it. I'm trying out different things and it's quite good, but we'll talk more about that later. So yes, you talk about the Meet the Manager series. So 2 years ago I started this for Fantasy Football Scout. We interview those with consistently incredibly high finishes. Some have never had a bad season. In Simon March's case, he's actually won it. Some have had a very rare bad year. They are all different, but some common themes do emerge. So what I've done is I've drawn out some of those themes, and we're going to discuss those in turn. So I'm going to put a picture up for this first one, and that is a picture of Sergio Agero, who we know and love so much in the FPL game. What I find quite interesting about him is I put him under the tag "Don't be afraid," because sometimes he can blank and sometimes he can get 20 plus points in a week. Hat tricks. What was it? 4-5 goals against Newcastle one time, or 2 times in fact. This is the kind of player he is. So he is the sort of player you probably want to punt on for the captaincy if you want to rise up the rankings. But you have to accept the risk. Will he play? So that's something we discussed in the Meet the Manager video. So making that leap from top 100k to top 10k and then further on, you need to make those sort of fearless moves. Don't be afraid. So captaining a low-owned player, ignoring the herd, and is a popular way of doing that. So an example is Late Riser that we'd had on the Meet the videos. He was talking about making bold moves, maybe for a hit, for perhaps someone who other people aren't captaining, but going for that, really. So an Agüero type player. They've got a very high point ceiling. And the very week after his interview with us, he got in Agüero, and Agüero got a hat-trick, and he'd captained him. And everyone thought, oh, okay, maybe I'll listen to that Late Riser guy. Anyway, that's the sort of theme we're talking about here. Another has been Jay Eggersdorf, who's topped our Fantasy Football Scout Hall of Fame for a long old time. He's one of those. He's not averse to a 12, 8-point hit every now and again to get in those players if he thinks they're going to be having a good fixture run. Sometimes, famously, he did it with Harry Kane. He got rid of Harry Kane just as he was about to go for hat tricks. But most of the time, because he's got multiple top 10k finishes. In fact, I think he's got 3. Yeah, he's got 3 top 1,000 finishes. I've got 1 top 1,000 finish. Almost killed me trying to get that. Getting 3, just anyway. So that's the sort of player he is, and that's the sort of strategy that works for them in the videos. But what about us lot? What do we think of that strategy? Andy, let's go with you first. What do you reckon? That don't be afraid strategy?
I think is way harder than it sounds. Yeah. First of all, because there is always that. I think a lot of the things we're going to talk about, they're actually quite hard to crack, and that probably sets those people above. I can give you an example where I've literally not done this, and it's cost me not a top 1,000 place, but a top 10,000 last season. End of last season, it was between Mane and Sterling captain for me. Mane was way less owned at the time, and I knew that Sterling would be higher captain. The only reason I captained Sterling because I was afraid that a mini league leader would catch me, even though he was miles behind. It would be almost like if he had overtaken me on the last game week with the amount of points he was behind, I would have almost had to just give him a clap. It would have been so almost impossible to do. But I was still that afraid. I didn't do it. And literally, the amount of points that I lost, it wasn't even that many, but it was the exact amount that I lost stopped me from getting into the top 10k. So I was just too afraid to captain Mane, who was the lesser owned player, which is crazy, especially when you think how good of a player Mane is. And you see this a lot with captaincy, especially because everyone talks about effective ownership and stuff like that. But I really think, and it's something I really want to try and do next year, is if you've got two players that are both extremely good and you're really not that sure, then it almost makes sense to do the lower owned one. If especially if it's like Mane and Salah, they seem to always be the good ones to compare because they can both haul at any given game. If you're really not that sure, like I suppose it depends how you look at it. Like some people will look at it, well, I'll just captain a higher owned one because that's the safer option. But don't be afraid. Probably is the way to get a higher finish. But I do think it's difficult to put into practice sometimes, though. And the only other thing I'll say, and a lot of my points are kind of the way you got to think about it is, it's quite hard. I think sometimes you almost have to like hold your nerve. So if you do go for it, it doesn't go right. A lot of people will just reverse back to how they used to play, but you can't. If you've played FPL for like 5-10 years. Of course, the odd decision here or there, it's football, is going to go wrong. So you kind of got to hold your nerve at the same time. And again, I think that's quite difficult to do. So yeah, and I think you almost as well. You don't want to. A lot of these guys, I think they know when to do it and when to not do it, which is another thing.
Timing is so important.
Yeah, exactly, because you don't want to just. I see a lot of people that'll say, I'm not going to be afraid now. I'm just going to do this every time. And they'll do it every week. And they won't necessarily think about, well, actually, it might not be the best time to do it. Maybe now is the time to go with the herd. And so to be. So, yeah, I think it's difficult. I wish I could do it more. And I've literally got an example of where it's just not helped me. But, yeah, I like this one. I think this is the way to get up the top. Like, top 10K is difficult, but top 1K is
this is the
even
top.
harder.
Yeah,
it's like a step up.
We'll come to David now. But yeah, one of the points I'll make is exactly that. This is exactly the top 1K sort of move you need to be making. But anyway, yeah, David, what do you think? Being fearless?
Yeah, I mean, I think Andy's hit the nail on the head with that last little point there. In that you gotta know exactly when to do it. So for me, this in a way, these two managers we've mentioned here, they take this strategy beyond just having it as a general mantra. They have the kind of nuance of knowing exactly when to apply it and when not to. Whenever you hear Late Riser talk about this particular method, he always, before he gets into the detail of exactly how he does it and when, he always caveats the herd mentality by saying the herd and the crowd, they're not stupid.
No.
Most of the time, they're going to be right. Maybe 60-70% of the time, the player that's the big popular player is probably going to do well enough to justify that interest. The key really comes from working out exactly when to go for the right player. And there's a number of different ways that you can do that. And I mean, to be honest, writing the Captain Sensible article every week for Scout, I sometimes have an inkling of when these sorts of players are going to make those types of moves, because it will be in a week where the player that's got sort of like 60% in the captaincy polls, you go through and you look at maybe the team they're going to play defensively over the last however many game weeks has actually been more of a stiffer test than you perhaps assume. Maybe there's been a change. Like maybe they're going to play Watford or a Southampton team who earlier in the campaign had been really bad. But if people are keeping the kind of their eyes peeled and they're having a look at some of the stuff that's in the members area, had noticed that this defence isn't as bad as it used to be. And that's where people who are using that tool are going to have that advantage over the people who aren't, because that'll be when they know that this important player, that's when this is the week not to, especially when they maybe look at an alternative. So then Agüero against Villa was perfect, because Agüero versus Villa just makes complete sense, because it's Villa's defence is one of the worst in the whole league all season. Agüero, when he played, his stats have been really nice. So yeah, tick box. I mean, one example from me in terms of when to time it, because I generally last season, tried to play as safe as I possibly could. But it was game week 8 last year where I really, really went against the crowd. And it was following this same line that I don't normally follow, but I did on this occasion because of all the factors I've just mentioned there. It was Kane against Cardiff. And everybody piled in on Kane, and I was so nervous because on paper, without doing any research, you just see Kane and you see Cardiff next to each other, and you think, wow, okay, I'm going for it. And then everyone else did too. It was in all the polls. He was right at the top. He'd not really been in anyone's team, so you really had to make some changes to get him in. And I quite like the look of Hazard versus Southampton that week, because Southampton's defence had actually been worse than Cardiff's defence in the period that we were kind of researching, sort of 4 or 5 weeks before. Hazard had a broader spread of points available because he was a midfield player, and was more likely to assist than Kane, and arguably more likely to score because he doesn't play in defensive midfield like Kane does. And sort of all of those factors in the end, I as Andy said there, you have to be really bold. You have to hold your nerve. But I did, and based on all those factors that I've mentioned, and the fact that Kane was highly captained and blanked, Hazard wasn't, and got something like 16 points. I can't remember exactly what my rank jump was, but it was massive. It set me straight into the top 100k in like game week 7 or 8 or something like that, and really kind of put me on a footing to kind of hold my ground for the rest of the season. But had I played that kind of mentality in some other game weeks, it might not have paid off. You've just got to wait for those windows of opportunity because, as Late Riser says, the crowd isn't stupid. They're not going to be wrong like they were in that Kane instance every single week. It'll probably be 1 in every 7 or 8 in all likelihood.
Yeah, I mean, I think what both of you said is so bang on with this, because this is a risky strategy, but it can pay off. And it is the strategy that I think, because it's not... in my notes I put here, it's not me. So I put in that this is something I need to sort of learn about a bit better. So I've finished in the top 10,000 a number of times, but only once in the top 1,000. And in order to get up to that move, you need to do this. You need to be risk. So I remember Evs, who was one of our moderators for a while, and he was in the top 10. He had a shot of winning it, but in order to win it, what did he do? He took that bold risk. He captained, I believe it was Michu, at that time when no one else around him was. It didn't work out, but if it had, he would have won the whole thing. And that's the kind of move you need to make in order to, you need to make that gamble. Sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it won't. But what you're saying about timing is so important as well. It's looking at those defences. So on paper, yeah, Cardiff, that example there, yeah, poor defence. But then hang on and look at it. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe they don't concede that many headers, and maybe the striker that you are captaining is a bit of a Peter Crouch figure. Heading the ball a lot. So those things. So for me, what I do is I'm quite risk averse. I will go with the safe options. So say you've got Agero against Villa and you've got Salah against Norwich at home. I'm going to go for that Salah every time. I know he's going to be well captained. I know I'm probably going to get at least 7 points out of him. And I know with Agüero, I'm either going to get 2 points, or I'm going to get 20 times 2. So I'm going to get 40 points from him. But I'll go for that Salah because I think more often than not, I'm looking to get that top 10k finish, and then hopefully moving on. So that's the bit I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say basically I'm not as good as these guys, and they need, and you
will be after this.
But I will be after this, hopefully, and I hope other people will as well. They'll be watching this thinking, okay, don't be afraid, but make sure the timing is right, and have a look at those defences. Have a look in detail at those stats. That's why underlying stats are so important, and that's sort of the next level stuff, and that's what a lot of these guys do. They look at the underlying stats.
Yeah. You have to, and again, I can give you. I think throughout this whole thing, I've got examples where I failed at all this rather than where I've done it well. But you have to weigh up the upside. Like, there's not always a massive upside to going against the grain, which we've kind of already touched on. Like, just to give you an extreme example, let's say Salah is owned by 70%. He's playing Norwich at home, and Aguero's away to. I don't know, Man United. Well, maybe Man United's not the best option. Man United in their prime when they're defensively really well, and Aguero's only owned by 5%. Yes, he's a huge differential, but the points he's probably going to make up on Salah there is almost non-existent. You would say from a, if you played that game out 100 times, you're sure that Salah would probably win it more often. So it's just trying to find that upside when that big explosive player has got that weak team, and he's low owned at the same time. That's the kind of time to do it. Like for example. I benched Pukki after he'd been on a really good run. Playing against Man City, I mean, to be fair, he did go on and get a lot of blanks after that game. But, He was very well owned. I was basically playing a defender who I was pretty much just hoping for a clean sheet. So the most I was really going to get was 6, potentially a bonus point or 2. And Pookie ended up getting 12. Everyone had him. And although it wasn't a huge difference in points, it did result in the kind of red arrow. That was one of the bad decisions made. So for that kind of bench, it's why I usually, and I've kind of gone against it this year, is always play the attacker, because there is almost always more upside. Unless you've got a Trent or an Alonso in comparison, it's different. But that you've got to look for this. Don't be afraid. Basically, I suppose to sum it up in short, you have to look how big the upside is, and I think that's quite often, especially what late riser and stuff does. If the upside is not that big, it's probably not worth taking the risk necessarily. They're looking for that kind of that massive point swing, and at the end, and he's talked about himself, that can go the other way, and you've got to learn to accept that. I think that's the hard thing to do. Sometimes it will go wrong.
And for some people who are watching this, and I get this a lot in the comments as well with the Meet the Manager videos. Oh, you got lucky. But then you think, how do you get 5 top 1,000 finishes and be lucky? It's just, I don't think it's possible. How do you, for example, Late Riser, he's had multiple top 10k finishes and 2 in the top 200. How do you get into the top 200 twice?
Very, very lucky.
Luck? You don't, because there are certain elements of skill to the game, and one of them, just what we've just been talking about there, and that's how you get those top finishes. Let's move on to another one.
The bravery itself is the skill.
The bravery is the skill, but it's timing that bravery. Yeah. So I'm going to put a picture.
and the timing too, yeah.
So I'm going to put up one of my favourite pictures on the Scoutcast this season. Has been Martial welcoming Fernandes in to supply assists for his goals. And if Rashford hadn't been so injured, he would have been benefiting as well, I'm sure. Basically, the whole Manchester United team must have been absolutely just so happy that they've got a real quality player to assist them like that. But I'm using him as an example of value. He's one of the most sought after players at the moment. Came into the game at 8.5 or 8. He's arguably been performing this season when he came in as an 11 million, 10.5, 11 million. So he's underpriced. Lots of people getting him in. Prices started to go up. So I use him as a good example of value player. So this is something that the Fantasy Football Scout founder, Mark Southerns, talked about in his Meet the Manager video. He talked about the idea of building up team value. So it's proved an effective strategy for him. Once again, multiple top finishes, 9 top 10,000 finishes, and he got in the top 50 one year. So, nearly in that kind of, could win it territory. Building up team value has been effective for him. It means he can create a strong squad later in the wildcard. So that means getting on bandwagons quickly. And as their price rises, they can rise by 0.5 million in a few months. And, he is there benefiting from that. And it means he can get a good wildcard or a good free hit later in the season. Just read out his stats there, his finishes over the years. It's clearly worked for him. What about you, Tom? I'll go over you first, David. Value, getting those price rises, getting on board those bandwagons, looking at team value, storing it all up, and then unleashing it on a second wildcard later in the season. What about you? Where do you stand on this strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly one I find as daunting, to be honest, as the don't be afraid. I mean, I actually kind of think there's a lot of overlap between these two concepts, because, I mean, one of the examples you sort of reference with Jay Exel, for example, is sometimes that don't be afraid is not necessarily to captain against the grain. It's to take those big hits, like a -12 and a -8. And Mark Southerns just lives and dies by those big hits, doesn't he? I mean, that's how he rolls. And they work most of the time. Even when he has a week where maybe he takes a -12 and it doesn't work in the short term, he'll get like 25 points that week. Yeah. Once the hit's taken into account, and the next week it's like 100 points. It's crazy. He definitely has one of these kind of almost like godlike knacks to know exactly how and when to do this. So I mean, for me, I find this particular element really quite challenging, because generally speaking, I like to try and stay slow and steady, and kind of I don't like making big changes. And because really to have this approach, you do need to have absolutely no fear of big hits. Because in order to do this, you're chopping and changing so often. Your team is constantly in flux, and so then I think so aiming for this is good if you can get it right, which is probably going to be the way we discuss all of these things, because it's like we said with the last one, timing is key. In this one, identifying the right targets is key. You need to be You can't. If you're going to be taking hits, you've got to make sure that everyone who comes in is an upgrade on who you got rid of. You can't be getting rid of someone you maybe thought was useful and end up with like a defender you're never going to play as part of a hit. You've got to make sure that every single component works, because the end result is great. If you keep your team value high, then your wild card is good. But I think if you aren't well practiced in this, if you're not experienced in taking hits all of the time, like someone like Mark is, it can backfire really badly, because you end up maybe not having the right amount of patience with certain players that maybe you should have done. You maybe end up having the wrong amount of patience with one. You've got to know exactly what you're doing, which sounds really simple, but that's why I find it really difficult. I'd much rather, I prefer to have a team that kind of like steadily evolves throughout the weeks, so that I'm not taking these big hits. And the thing is, that can work as well, but I think maybe that's the type of approach that is never going to get you to finish 42nd in the world. And then maybe that's the difference between those two things. So it's a very daunting one for me, because I readily admit, I in any given week, I'm not going to be brave enough to take the hits to consistently manage that team value. And the thing is, even if you hold your team value is still decent anyway. If you have a team that's steady and you're not making massive changes to, as long as you've got the right players and you've got, I don't want to use the word template, but something close. Your team value is probably going to build at a nice steady rate anyway, because if the players you have are performing, everybody else is buying them, so therefore the value is going to increase anyway. It just probably won't be at such a sharp increase as if you do what Mark does. So it's probably not one for me, not because it's a bad strategy, but because I don't trust myself to execute it properly.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, and I think it's worth mentioning Mark as the example here. He's someone who's done it very successfully, but he also has had he's also had bad seasons. Not many, but he's mostly had good seasons. But that shows with this, because this is much more long-term strategy. This isn't like, I'm going to get this captain in for this week, and it didn't work out, so I'll get rid of him. This is very much, you're looking at restructuring your whole squad almost constantly to get bandwagons. And to get them strategically. And I don't mean get bandwagons in a follow the herd way. I mean get ahead of bandwagons as well. And that's the other skill to this. It's worth pointing out that it can go wrong, because you have to be a really good manager to do this effectively. Which, obviously we're a bit biased here, but Mark obviously is. This I think is the trickiest one to get right, because it's really long term. But yeah, Andy, what about you? What's your thoughts on value?
Yeah, I do think this is one of the things that's probably overplayed a lot, like generally in the community, that team value is massively important, and it can be for sure. I don't think it's the be all and end all, though. I think like there's ways to do it. Like, you don't necessarily need to be chasing value late on into the season, middle of the season, when there's maybe more games coming. There's European games, maybe international break stuff. I do think it's probably a little bit riskier there. And again, you have to weigh it up. Like, if it can be an international break, doesn't mean the player you're bringing in is on international duty, and maybe they're fine to bring in. I do think if the only thing that potentially could go wrong for that transfer is a training ground injury, then I feel that's a risk you can make. I think if you get a training ground injury, that's very unlikely. So at the start of the season, I'm much more likely, and I did this year, to make those early hits, because that's all you're really worried about. There are no cup games early on in the season. There's there is international break between like game weeks 3, 4, or 5, whichever one it ends up being. But again, the first kind of 2-3 weeks, I'm fine with it. And then even a bit further on, I tend to change my strategy deeper into the season, though, because I think the price. One of the reasons the price races aren't necessarily as bad is because there's less people playing. Obviously, a lot of the active managers they kind of die off as. Or stop their teams die off because they stop managing them through the season. So I kind of like the strategy. I just don't think it needs to be. I kind of halfway through the season, I pretty much stopped looking at price rise sites, to be completely honest, because I don't want that to be my decision. And I think that's one thing. There's one thing with making a decision because you're going to be priced out of a transfer you absolutely know you want to do. And then there's a difference. Some people, they make that transfer because they're going to get priced out of it, even if it's not necessarily one they want to take. So obviously you got to think about that as well.
You can get sucked in too easily by the pressure of knowing the player's going to go up.
Exactly. That's why I tend to stop watching them as it goes on. I mean, you do sometimes get caught out, but it's not often you get, you're not completely screwed from it happening. And then one thing I will say, I've had low team value later on in the season. it's quite often only the difference between one player versus another. It's not like your whole team has to be absolute, what word am I trying to look for? Just like a downgrade, basically. You don't have to downgrade your whole team. It's maybe the difference. I remember a few seasons ago, you have to start looking for differentials, and that actually can help you out sometimes because you're looking outside the box. You're not just getting the player you 100% want.
It's like the difference between getting Vardy in and getting Rashford or something. Or
something like that. Like, I remember ages ago, it was like getting a 5 point. This was back when Ben Davies was cheap for Spurs. It was getting him in instead of like a 5.5 or a 6 million. And he went on to absolutely smash it for the rest of the season. So sometimes I'm not saying it's necessarily the reason to not look at team value, but it does make you think outside the box a bit more. Because if you can get every player you want, okay, fair enough, you've got them, but you're not looking for that differential that's maybe lesser owned and stuff. So I'm happy. I'm fine with doing it, and I do it earlier in the season. But as you get later on, I'm not as a fan of it. I just think there's more stuff that can go wrong.
Yeah.
Which is why I wouldn't do it necessarily later on in the season.
Yeah, I mean, this strategy is also not me, as the previous one was. But unlike the previous one, I want to get better at that previous strategy about dealing with fear of moves and captaincy. With this one, I don't want to get better at it because I like to find bargain players. The whatever to my cost in the past, a Jason Punchin. But then also in the past, I've gone for Januzaj, or I've gone for Sterling or Kane when they were mega cheap early on. And these are the kinds of moves I get more satisfaction out of as well. I remember getting Aaron Moyen when he was really cheap at Huddersfield. He scored that week. And I remember that more than some of those other moves, because that's part of the FPL, I think. So this sort of moves away from that. I do look at value, but it doesn't dictate what I do. But what I do quite like doing with value, and this can help get higher finishes, is not chop and change all the time, but just be quite patient as well. So you get in a player early when you spot the signs they're about to become a bandwagon or they've only just become a bandwagon. Lundstrom is a good example of that. We're going to talk about him a bit later. But it's these types of players, Wan-Bissaka as well. Get them in cheap. And then when they get to a price point that's really high, and then the fixtures turn, or maybe their form goes off or they get a bit injured, moving them out as well, making a nice profit on them and then investing that elsewhere in the team. I quite like doing that. Once again, for me, that's another element of FPL. So I look at value in that sense. But what I'm not interested in, and this is that 0.1. Oh, so-and-so's going up in price Wednesday night or whatever. But for me, I don't care about that. I want to wait. Unless I'm going to be completely priced out of that move and it's a player I really, really want. But if I'm not going to be priced out of it, if I've got 0.3 in the bank or something, or enough money from the player I'm getting rid of, is I'm quite happy to wait until Friday evening after Neil's team press conference roundup, and also or Saturday morning even. I'm quite happy to do that. And I think the key to this strategy is you can be like someone like Mark as a manager, and you're doing it strategically. You're looking at those players, who is going to get my team the most points. Just so happens they're going up in price as well. It's very strategic the way he's doing that, building up team value for a long-term strategy. But what I see a lot of times, and I think the major mistake that a lot of FPL managers do, is to look at that price before the points, and they go, so-and-so's going up 0.1, I'll get him in. Why are you getting him in? I don't know. It's just going up in price. And hooray, I've got a price rise. But what else are you getting? And if you can't really answer that, what else are you getting, then don't get him in. Yeah.
There's something really good that Jay Eggersdorf, who obviously we've already mentioned, says on this particular issue, which I remember stuck with me for a long, long time, is that that 0.1 to him is what you invest in the information.
Yeah.
That's what you pay for that information. Yeah. And obviously Andy's already mentioned that most of the time training ground injuries are going to be the main things that catch you out, and you can't see those coming anyway. But actually, it's not if we're isolating, I want player X, right? But it's not just about player X; it's about everybody else in your team. If you look, this player's going up by 0.1, spend that information, spend that 0.1 to get information not just on him, but on everybody else in your team. Because if you make that move and then you find out the player you're going to captain is now out for 3 weeks for whatever reason, then you're a bit stuck, because you're then going to have to take a hit, when actually if you'd have if you'd spent the money on the information, you'd save yourself the hit and your team would be in better shape. So always see that information as something worth paying for in FPL, which seems perhaps a bit weird because normally we just pay for players, but players who you have more information on cost more money. That's just how it goes.
That's a really good point, especially at the moment. So obviously we are talking as the Premier League and FPL has been postponed at the moment. We don't know what's going to happen yet. That's for a later Scoutcast to discuss. But we don't know which players are going to be ill any given week. And so making those early moves, and there is, as Andy said about, the risk of a training ground injury, but now the risk that they'll test positive for COVID-19 and won't be able to play for 2 weeks, and that news emerging on a Friday, rather, 2 days after you've made that move, that is something that we might have to get used to. Maybe I'm talking seasons here. I don't know, because I'm not a medical expert in terms of when there's going to be a vaccine available. But this new normal this is something we might have to get used to. So that's why I find if you can do this strategy amid what we're going through now, wow, it's like taking it up to the next level. But some people might like that type of challenge within the game as well. Because I think with FPL, it's a game within games, and this is some of the game within games I like. And I say chasing points, it's anticipating price rises. This strategy.
Yeah, a lot of people like that.
They like that.
Yeah, they like the value. There's nothing wrong with it.
And there's nothing wrong with it. It's a game within a game, and they like it.
Well, one thing that you reminded me of just a minute ago, actually, it's kind of the opposite team value. Is when you have a player who's gone up a lot. I find a lot of people get trapped because they're worried about losing value, and you'll hear that all the time. I don't want to sell X player because I'm going to lose 0.5 million, but some people obviously realise this, but a lot of people don't think you only lost that money if you want to get that player back straight away. Pretty much, if you're selling a player because they've got awful fixtures and it's not like a big hitter that's likely to do well in those matches, and you take them out, then chances are, if you think they're going to do badly, and they do, then they're going to go down in price anyway. So you're not going to buy them back at the same price you sold them for. So if anything, you've actually made money, and I think that's a big distinction. When you sell a player that you've made 0.5 on, you're not losing 0.5, you've made 0.5.
Exactly.
And I think a lot of people worry about the money they're going to lose when they sell a player. So I think that's worth taking into account for sure.
A good way of doing that is when you get that player in, just think of them. That's what they are to you. You get that player in for 8.5 and they go up to 9.5 and you want to sell them. Don't think, I'm going to lose that money. Just think, wow, he is an 8.5 player and so I'm selling him for 8.7 or something. That's what, it's all profit. That's what it is. That's game within a game. Okay, next picture, next theme. Here we go. Hero and villain, quite literally a villain. He plays for Aston Villa. Jack Grealish. I put him in here because Tom Freeman in one of his videos mentioned him as well. And this is all part of a balanced approach. And I'll come to this. This is me. Balanced approach, price points. You're looking at the value of each player, and you're looking about how can I get how can I get players in quickly without having to juggle up my team too much, and playing price points and having balance. So you've got an expensive defender, cheap defender, expensive midfielder, etc., etc. You've always got that sort of price point to get them. And Jack Grealish is a good example. So Tom Freeman, he reserves a midfield place, not just because he's a Villa fan, but he reserves a midfield place for a mid-price punt, a mid-price risk there. So that could be this season. This could have been Mason Mount. One of his was Theo Walcott even, and most successfully Jack Grealish. But he can move that around, and he can, because this is quite an interesting price point as well, because there's a lot of form comes and goes. They're much more fixture based as well. Villa have got 5 good fixtures in a row. Get Jack Grealish in. Villa have got 5 bad fixtures in a row. Well, he's dispensable. Maybe you can go for Mason Mount instead. That's the kind of mentality behind it, and that's what you get with a balanced approach. So game within a game. Tom Freeman, multiple top 10,000 finishes once again, and that's what he likes to do. His game is to spot a risk, a mid-price midfield gem, and to get them before anyone else can, or get them when they're starting to get points. Another with multiple top finishes, Triggerlip's first ever Meet the Manager video. Here he talks about the importance of balance, and what I've just talked about, the price points. By spreading the budget around, he can hop on and off players much more easily than other people. And it also just means you can get, instead of saying, you can go through a season and think, well, I never really had any good defenders. But this way you can tap into the likes of Alonso, Alexander-Arnold, or you can tap into a good budget forward, for example, or mid-price forward. Anyway, hopefully I've explained that a lot. A lot of people don't like this method, but I do. That's me. Andy, what do you think of this balanced approach, price points?
Yeah, I do quite like it. I would say this is pretty much the reason why I will never play 5 at the back with 5 big defenders, because it's very hard then to get the money elsewhere. You're talking like three or four changes. You don't really get that with attackers, just because of the way they're priced and the amount you have. So this is why I'll never say never, I guess, but I'll probably never play 5 at the back, because you have like 5 expensive defenders. It's hard to move that many on. So I quite like it. I probably don't do it as much as you do, I would say. I don't mind being kind of 2 moves away from a move that I want. I think obviously it's very, I'm sure you know yourself, it's very difficult to be 1 move from every single transfer. I think one thing to consider for this as well is you have to be kind of realistic about for example, if you're saying you're 2 moves away from switching to a premium striker, but to do that, you need to get rid of your premium midfielder. Well, realistically, you're going to want to get rid of them anytime soon, because if not 2 moves away, you're probably actually 3, maybe even 4 moves away. I do think this has slightly changed, although, again, I think we mentioned this on a video recently. Obviously, the guy at the top of the FPL this season currently has had pretty much a premium striker the whole season, but for a lot of people, they haven't. So I haven't really worried about having a premium striker slot, but I know that the way up there is it's either the premium striker or the premium midfielder, and so I know I'm only 2 transfers away from switching it. So I don't necessarily have, that makes sense. I don't necessarily have a premium in each position, but I know I'm only 2 points away, not 2 points, 2 hits away, or 2 transfers away from getting it. So I do quite like that. Yeah, I think the Tom's way of having a free kind of midfield. So I quite like. I've never done it. I don't think really. I quite like it because it means you can take more of a punt. And sometimes I avoid punts because I've not maybe got that slot to do it in. So I quite like that. Maybe that's something I could do next season or something. But yeah, I get the idea of price points, and it's why I wouldn't go like 3 premium strikers usually. I mean, maybe that would change in future seasons, or 5 premium defenders. But yeah, you want to be a couple of moves away, but you have to be realistic about the players you're actually going to want to remove, I think.
Yeah. What about you, David? Nice balanced squad. Is this you?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it didn't used to be, but I think this is probably the biggest, or this is the change that I made to my methodology over the last sort of 3 or 4 years that had the biggest impact. I think, especially last year. I kind of looked to people. I mean, I saw what Triggerlips was saying, and you've been saying it as well, Joe. And the more you put it into practice, the more you see the fruits of the work, because the way you do well in FPL obviously is not having a good week here and then that's it, a good week there and that's it. It's about maintaining momentum. And for me, one of the advantages of this system is it makes it easier to maintain that momentum, because you've always got you're more flexible to change sort of either tactics or jump on this player, jump on that player. For me, it made a huge difference, just always having that structure throughout most of the season. And ironically enough, when I've veered away from what I see as a structure that's more flexible, that's when I've not done as well. So I had a bit of a dip last year around sort of February time, for example. I was 3K in the world, and then I think I went down to about 25K. I dropped, more than I wanted to really in that sort of phase of the season, and it was because I'd made a few short-term decisions for a double game week or blank game week, and I just kind of got I was a bit out of shape. I was out of this price point. I had players that I liked rather than a balanced system, and then it meant that I couldn't get to this player, couldn't get to that player. It left me really inflexible for my transfers, and then I was missing out on bandwagons at a time when they were the template was shifting, because January, February, March is always when it shifts, and I couldn't get to the new template because I'd gone in the direction away from the original template in a way that was just really, my team just had like the turning circle of a tugboat, because I just had everything in the wrong place. I actually had too many of these midfielders that Tom was talking about. I think I kind of dabbled in making Snodgrass my fifth midfielder and all sorts of things like that. And then arguably that's kind of that had happened this season as well. I've mentioned many times before that the wildcard I did in sort of like game week 7 or 8 this season. In the end, I realised the structure was all over the place. I rather than have De Bruyne sit there as the kind of the key premium midfielder outside of Salah, I'd gone for Sterling. It was too expensive. I tried to sort of be different and go away from De Bruyne in that direction, but it then meant I made sacrifices in other areas. I couldn't switch to any of the mid-price forwards quickly enough because I didn't have one. I couldn't switch to any of these these midfielders because I didn't have one. All of these sorts of things. I've kind of found that when I do follow it, I do well, and when I don't follow it and my team feels bent out of shape, inflexible, that's when it starts to cause me problems. So this is the one I believe in the most, and arguably, and not to sort of all due respect to Trigger Lips and Tom Freeman, this isn't a slight on them. I think it's the easiest of the ones to kind of pull off if you're maybe a bit of a newbie to some of the more elite level strategies. This is a fantastic place to start compared to some of the other ones, because it doesn't really require the same level of guts to kind of execute it. You're not having to make 12-point hits there, go against the captaincy grain there. It's a nice entry level strategy, I think, to anyone who wants to take their the way they play this game from casual to a bit more more hardcore.
The way that, because what we're talking about, the Meet the Manager videos, the way that we can turn this kind of entry level, this is like your route one into doing okay in FPL, do this strategy, get
I think
balance.
so.
But the way of turning that into Tom Freeman or Trigger Lips and getting those high finishes consistently over the years, the way of turning that is to make sure you're flexible within it. So don't think, have like one place. Like I often go for 4.5 midfielder. It's fine. It does because it's fine. But I'll be flexible about the other price points where you maybe captain that player. So you've got to be looking at where the budget is and the way the players are priced at the beginning of the game, and the way the prices fluctuate and what they can become. So for example, this season there hasn't been a lot for long periods of the game, there hasn't been a tremendous amount of choice in the 8.5 midfielder category. So the price points and the balance structure I went for didn't really have that. So you have like a Salah or a Mane and a De Bruyne, and then you can have a cheap, 2 or 3 cheaper midfielders, and then you can use that money to have a bit more expensive attackers, or maybe an expensive defender. So that balance approach. I wildcarded a while back. How was I to know the pandemic was going to follow a few weeks later? But nevertheless, I wildcarded. But one of the reasons I did wildcard was because of Fernandes at Manchester United. Because I saw him come in and I thought, hang on a minute, if he does well, I've suddenly got choice in this category now. And with my current setup, I can get an 8.5 midfielder. But it's not as easy. And I have to make tough choices. And I'm not sure I do want to get rid of Salah or De Bruyne, or in this case, Mane and De Bruyne. So then that's when it's using this setup, these price points, and thinking, okay, I'm changing slightly here. And that's when I use my wildcard, basically. And so I don't know whether other people who do this strategy well have a similar method, but it's keeping an eye on the pricing, the market, as it were, and making sure that your balance goes with it. Because you can quickly, your balanced team, what you think is a balanced team, can suddenly look really unbalanced with a few price rises and falls here and there. And suddenly, and maybe after January as well, January is a good time because you get these players like Fernandes in. What about Demba Ba? Did Demba Ba came in January? And, a host of other players. Sanchez. No, not Sanchez. Suarez. Suarez was January.
I think Suarez was summer, wasn't it?
Was he summer?
I thought he was January. I think he arrived at the same time as Andy Carroll. Yeah, same day.
January. Oh, okay, fair enough.
Yeah. So it's these types of players. They come in and you think, hang on a minute, I want this structure to get there. I've suddenly got choice in this category, and that's the way of moving this strategy into a meet the manager style one. So it's not just I must only get this price player. It's like, have a look at the pricing. Can you get a balance within that? And that's the nuanced approach that helps. I hope I've explained that all right, because I spend a lot of time trying to explain price points to people, and I'm sure I get it wrong each time. So that was my other attempt at that. So if anyone else wants to talk about price points to me, then I'm available on Twitter or Fantasy Football Scout forum, and I do like to chat about such things. Okay, here's another thing. Here he is, John Lundstrom. The gift, the God, what else do we call him? The Lord?
The Lord, yeah.
He's everything. But
the man himself.
Now, we on the Meet the Manager video, we interviewed Josh from Always Cheating podcast, and he said something I really liked. Is about taking advantage when FPL throws managers a bone. So he is looking at that the game and saying, this is an opportunity. Be opportunistic. So it's spotting when that game is offering something like this. In Lundstrom's case, he is a 6 million-ish attack-minded creative midfielder for a team that's actually doing very well. But for some reason, he's priced as a 4 million defender. What an opportunity. I mean, it's probably the biggest opportunity I've ever seen in this game in 10 years.
It'll never happen again.
It never happened again. It's just.
But we said it about Wan-Bissaka, so.
Yeah, Wan-Bissaka was, but Lundstrom's just. Yeah, it's like Wan-Bissaka's going, I'll be an attacking, and then Lundstrom's hold my pint.
Exactly.
Hold my goals. So it's
hold my goat.
But there's other things. So for example, unfortunately, a player might get injured, and then there's a squad player that you hadn't thought of. Suddenly they've got an opportunity. Iheanacho was actually quite good at Man City when he took his opportunities. That's up a bone there being thrown, an opportunistic moment. And it shows the importance of keeping tabs on the news, the press conferences, what's happening with players as well. It's looking at those opportunities. Will that player get suspended? Who will come in for them? And those types of things. Is that player being moved position? Are they better on the wing now? It's those types of opportunities. That's what Josh's talking about there. I'll put a picture of Lundstrom up because the greatest opportunity. But yeah, I'll go to David first because I know he loves Lundstrom more than Andy. But I'll come to you in a sec, Andy. But yeah, David, what do you think? Just in terms of that being opportunistic, how important is that to getting that mega high finish?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. I mean, people who had, let's use Lundstrom as an example. People who had Lundstrom from game week 1 obviously did considerably better in the short term, let's say first 10 weeks, if they did everything else right, than those who responded to that opportunity. They got in there ahead of the curve. Then he was only taking up 4 million of their budget. He obviously was providing some profit that Andy's talked about for when we sold them as well. It makes a huge difference. And I think, but you have to, I think with all of these, I'm probably going to sound like a broken record. You have to know how to do it right. So I think this is the thing is, if you were to just look at all of these approaches and just be like, I'm going to do that, and you just do it without any kind of research or taking kind of a nuanced approach to each one, I think that's the key to failure. But personally, I think you've got to know when to go for them, when not. So the reason why Lundstrom we should have gone with him, and obviously were proved right, was for all of the reasons you've mentioned there. But because of what type of player he was. But we knew that information before the season started if we paid very, very close attention to Sheffield United's pre-season, for example. It's something that we always do on Fantasy Football Scout. We always look at the pre-season friendlies. We document them in excruciating detail, and we put the information on a spreadsheet. And you could see that, I can't remember exactly where he ranked, but I'm pretty sure in terms of outfield players, he was the top 3 most used. And a player doesn't get used that much in pre-season if the manager has no plans for him to be involved, for example. Additional level of research would be you'd know that Sheffield United were a team that were going to come up and try to have some element of defensive stability, and that's proved to be true as well. So all of those things, if you were paying very close attention, you'd notice that about Lundstrom. Where it can sometimes go wrong, I think, is let's use another example of another 4 million defender from last season, Lee Peltier at Cardiff, where we saw the opportunity to double pivot with 2. Yeah, exactly, yeah. We a lot of us did a double pivot thing with 2 4 million defenders last season. Wan-Bissaka and Peltier went in completely different directions, didn't they? We kind of thought, there's a possibility they could both have got useful. Wan-Bissaka was used in every preseason match. Peltier was kind of in and out. Warnock is the kind of guy who doesn't usually have a settled defence. And I'm not saying, because I went for Peltier, and I'm not saying that if you did, you made a massive mistake, but he didn't turn into anything particularly exciting because actually there wasn't really that much to buy into it in the first place. And in the end, cost us a bit of money because he went down to like 3.9 before we could sell him. So that's maybe where it can go wrong with a player like Lundstrom. Some of the other things you mentioned is when a player is in a different position. And I think, again, you have to take a really sensible approach to whether or not a player playing in a different position is good or bad. Midfielder being shoved up front, that's not always good. A forward player being shunted to a midfield position isn't always bad. So a couple of examples. Richarlison, about a year ago, when they were having serious problems, Everton, with who was playing up front. I can't remember who they had there at the time. I think they had Tosin. And really, they didn't really have anything that was working. So Silva put Richarlison up front. And for the first few weeks, it really didn't work because he wasn't. They were trying to play him as a target man, and he isn't really a target man. He's kind of like a flare wide man who kind of thrives when he's not being marked. So then when he was marked extensively as a lone forward, actually him playing up front was a bad thing. So if you jump straight on him, he's going to play up front, it didn't work out initially. In the long run, it actually has worked out quite nicely. With the system they've got now, Richarlison playing up front is a good thing because he's up there with DCL, he gets fantastic support. That's good. Another example, Aubameyang. We constantly have this debate about Aubameyang. Is him playing on the wing a bad thing? Sometimes, yes. I mean, we've all seen the pictures of him sometimes having to cover back like he's playing at left back. But, you've only got to look at the points that he's got so far this season. It's not always a bad thing that he's there. Rashford, another example. He's having a really good season when he's fit, but he's been playing on the wings. But that doesn't matter because he's got Fernandes. Now he's got Martial, who can kind of occupy some of the markers so that Rashford can come in, and he's on. And he sometimes has penalties as well. So I think with this, be opportunistic, yes, but don't just launch yourself at what looks like an opportunity. I think you have to kind of do your research and make sensible decisions about all the different factors to sort of like kind of do a litmus test of, is this as big an opportunity as I think it is? I mean, of course, you're always going to take some risks, but there's more to it than just kind of like, he's 4 million, so I'm going to get him, or he's playing up front, so I'm going to get him. Because Iosi Perez is another one. He played in sort of forward positions, and it hasn't been quite as effective as maybe when he's played on the wing off Vardy. So you have to kind of be sensible about how you go for it, I think.
Yeah, Andy, is that how you view it as well?
Yeah, pretty much. I don't have a huge amount to add. Like, Hazard's another one that comes to mind of someone playing up front, and everyone's like, well, he's playing up front now, but was never. I don't think he was ever that good from an FPL point of view as a false nine. Midfielders to forwards doesn't always work out. I mean, there's just certain times where you just don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Like, I remember Charlie Daniels at Bournemouth at one point was on penalties, like 4.5 million on penalties defender. It doesn't matter how many clean sheets Bournemouth are going to get, you just get them in. Yeah. At the start of last season, I went for Zinchenko, which wasn't necessarily like a glamorous pick, but he was like $1 million cheaper than the rest of the Man City defenders. He was going to play according to pre-season, and Fat Mendy was out. They didn't end up getting as many clean sheets as I thought they might, but in that Man City team, I kind of thought it was worth the risk with potential for attacking returns, because I think anyone in Man City colours can get attacking returns. So there's certain things like that, and you have to just look at just what's it going to mean for the squad. Like, if a really expensive defender comes out of the team, yes, they're going to make that defence worse, probably, but if the replacement is kind of $1 million, $1.5 million cheaper, it's maybe worth a punt, especially if they're going to be nailed. So the other one that I kind of got stung on quite a lot is second choice strikers. You have to be really careful about them because sometimes a striker comes out and they might play for a good team, but their second choice isn't that great. I remember Chelsea back in the day, like Remy, and that used to be the second choice striker. Anytime I can't even remember who was first choice at the time. He never did well, but he was much cheaper. And there's a chance, obviously, the second choice, and they might even have two backups, and they might rotate and stuff like that. So it's different for a team like Man City. Like, if Aguero gets injured, for the majority, not always, but for the majority, Jesus is going to play, and vice versa. That's
probably the biggest opportunity around at the moment. Aside from Lundstrom, the classic who's going to play up front for Man City. Whoever it is going to score. If you've only got a choice of one, there's your opportunity.
Yeah, so you just have to look at stuff like that. So, I mean, there's loads of examples we'll probably go for, but yeah, look at all the examples. But just remember, it's not always, like David said, to be honest, it's not always a good thing to have midfielders going to forwards and stuff like that.
No. I mean, one of the this is also me, this opportunity one. I do like to that because being a journalist, I tend to look at the news anyway, and doing content for Fantasy Football Scout, you tend to be aware of the news and developments there anyway, so that helps. But I urge other people to do that. Read Fantasy Football Scout, read the articles, watch the press conferences, those types of things. And
here's really quickly, but I forgot. Basically what you're saying, based on the current situation, when we come, if we come back, and hopefully we do at some point, whenever that might be, there's going to be a lot of players that we wouldn't have been looking at because they were injured, who are suddenly going to be back, and that could be an opportunity because their ownership is going to be low. And
Kane, Rashford, players like that.
Yeah, exactly. Kane, Rashford, Pogba. There's Son as well. There's quite a lot of them who will be lesser owned now, and people won't necessarily have the chance to get them straight back in. So there's going to be huge differentials.
Exactly. So, for example, on the exact same point, I have in the back of my mind Kane and possibly Agüero, but who's in my squad at the moment in real FPL, ready and waiting for the season start, should it do, is Aubameyang. Because I'm quite happy. I like Arsenal's fixtures. I like him, but he's an easy move. So it goes back to the previous point about price points and balance, but it also figures highly in this one about opportunities. And I don't know whether Kane is going to be an opportunity, but I know he has been in the past, and I'd like to be able to get some Kane opportunity there. But another one I was going to mention about is doubling up as well. This is a strategy that fits nicely into this one, opportunities. Very rarely you will get a really good double act. You will get Sturridge Suarez was a great one. Whoever's assisting will be scoring, the other one will be scoring, assisting. They're helping each other. You're getting multiple points to root just from two players for the same action, the same goal there. But look out for things like that. Now, this happened last season. Callum Wilson, who was assisting him? Fraser, every time. Oh, hang on a minute. Ryan Fraser scored. Oh, Callum Wilson assisted him. And this was happening all the time. That's an opportunity. Look at that. That is a piece of news for FPL managers that's ready and waiting for you to take an opportunity for. And I got both in, and lots of other people did as well. And yeah, that's it. Opportunity taken. Let's move on to the last one we've got here. So there's lots of top tips. Do look at all of the Meet the Manager videos. There's lots of good advice here. So we've just drawn out some for this one. But this is one that time and again we get. So I've got a picture of a Liverpool team here, looking happy. They probably just scored again. It's play your own game. What game have they been playing? Pressing game. They've been playing that pressing game, and what's happened? Well, they started to this trickle of trophies. Little ones like the Champions League, but also whatever happens with this season. Surely, has there been a better team this season? League leaders there for many weeks. So that's it. So whatever your game is, whether you are a maverick, whether you are a dullard, whether you take risks, don't take risks, like a balanced squad, you think, oh, the hell, I'm just going to get 5 amazing defenders in. Whatever it is, play your game. Because when you go away from that, unless you spend a lot of time thinking about how you're going to go away from that strategy, it often doesn't work. So this is from all of them, really. So one of the main themes that emerged, they had a strategy that worked. We've listed some of them. And then they fine-tuned it as well. But what happens if they moved away from that? Well, this is when I asked the question, oh, hang on a minute, you got all these top 10,000 finishes, but what about this 200,000 finish or 500,000 finish you got? And the answer is often, I went away from the strategy. I did something different. They don't like taking hits, suddenly took hits that season. And that's often the way there. So yeah, just throw that out there. David, is that the way it's worked for you? Do you have a game? Do you play that? What happens if you go away from your game?
Yeah, well, I mean, I kind of briefly touched on it already in this video, in that I feel like my game is probably closer to yours, Joe, than perhaps many others. Patience with players and a nice calm structure that means I'm not constantly looking at price changes, and I can just, very leisurely take in the information on a Friday and be like, change this. Very small goalkeeper transfer here. There's all sorts of really boring stuff. And whenever I've done that, that's when I've had periods of success. And then, as I've already mentioned in this video, when my squad's been out of kind of shape, or I've been taking hits, or captaining the wrong player when I should have. This all moving away from a very dullard approach. Whenever I try and do anything Maverick, it never pays off because I kind of do it half-assed in a way. Like you have to, if you're going to be a Maverick, you got to go hard or go home.
Yeah.
And I just don't have the guts to go quite that far.
Yeah, you can't.
So
be
I just end up getting
little
stuck in the middle
of
of the two approaches.
Yeah, you can't be.
Yeah, I've got a tiny Maverick shoot which I'm constantly trying to squash.
Yeah.
I'm constantly trying to squash it, like that Benteke celebration he does. And when I eventually quash it, then we're fine. So I completely agree. Whenever I've tried to move away from something I feel comfortable with, if you're moving into something that's different to what you're used to, you don't have the experience of knowing how to deal with the problems that new approach affords you. So then I think that's the root cause of why I think you if you try to move away from what you're comfortable with, that's when you have problems.
Yeah. Is that the same with you, Andy? I mean, do you have a game, and what happens when you don't stick with it?
Yeah, I think I kind of do. I'm not adverse to hits ever. I think if I need them, I need them. I'm kind of that kind of player. I don't mind getting rid of kind of two big hitters to spread the value. It doesn't always work. Trent Alexander-Arnold this year, getting rid of him was a pretty bad decision in the end. But I've definitely adopted some of these. So this year I definitely went early on transfers, and I'll probably do that again next year. I think the opportunity to get a lesser captain player lesser owned players. So for example, triple captaincy, I'm pretty sure at the time, I could be wrong, I think Mane was lesser owned than Salah, or I knew that Salah was going to be captain more. So I went for Mane triple captain. It didn't pay off. That's not a bad decision. That's just unlucky. The only thing I'll say is if you're going to start doing something different, don't feel like you have to go all in. So if you're going to change your strategy, you should probably do it kind of gradually. So one I always see at the end of every season, people always have one of two differences for next season. I'm going to take more hits, or I'm going to take less hits. And it's always one or the other. It's not, I might take a few more if they're needed. It's always, I'm definitely going to take more. Well, what if you don't need to take those hits? And what if your team's in dire straits, so you're going to take less hits? Well, or I'm going to take no hits. I might see that. So I think you have to just, we've said it a lot throughout all these, you have to take each individual situation. If you need a hit, then take one, but don't take them willy-nilly either. Like it's just, you can have a kind of balanced approach.
It's true. No one ever says, next season I'm going to take good hits. No one ever says
I'm going to take just the amount of hits that I need.
This is the theme, I think, overall that comes to it. So we've listed some of the strategies. Some of those are definitely me, the balanced approach, and some of them aren't. The playing with that no fear and looking at team value. That's not really me. But I think the key is finding sort of what your general game is. And you might not know this immediately. It might take a couple of seasons to do it. This is for new managers starting. But this bit about finely tuning it, and something a lot of those I've interviewed and Meet the Manager have fine-tuned it. And that's where, once again, it's that nuanced approach can really pay off. So we're going to talk about virtual FPL in a minute. And there's one thing I've been trying out on there, which is a new approach, but fine-tuning an approach. And that has been basically looking at the balance, looking at price points, but using it to do the sort of thing that Late Riser was talking about looking for those sort of fearless opportunities. So one thing I've done recently in virtual FPL, so I'm hoping that people who aren't playing virtual FPL will keep listening to this, because what we're talking about is themes about being an FPL manager, and the virtual FPL game that's been created does this. So I've had two price points of a striker and a midfielder. So I got in Salah and Ayew. Salah as my captain, really lots of goals, and Ayew as the make weight for that. And then when the fixtures turn, I moved up to Kane and got in Zaha instead of Salah. So no hits, just didn't take a chance for 1 week, next week, done. And now Kane is injured, so I think I'm going to go back to Salah and Ayew again. Or, no, actually I did go do that, Salah and Ayew, and now I'm thinking of going Aubameyang to Traore, for example. The reason I've said all of that is because that's a nuanced approach to what I already do about price points and balance. And that's my attempt to sort of fine-tune it and be a little bit more like Late Riser, whilst fixing it, sitting within a really dullard strategy. And that way I can get maximum returns. So what's happened? I've got loads and loads of green arrows in that game because of it. So far it's been successful for me. Obviously price moves in FPL make that slightly trickier, But if the price moves aren't too good, so I mean, to be honest, Salah and Mane haven't really changed drastically price wise, so it's all still possible. But anyway, I've just kind of preempted a little bit of virtual FPL chat there but I just thought it was relevant to what I'm doing there. Andy, virtual FPL, tell people about what it is.
Yeah, so it's a virtual FPL game, as you might imagine from the title. The clue is in the name. We're into game week 16 now, so you can find it on. It's basically run by Ragabolly, who runs livefpl.net, which I'm sure a lot of people have used if you've not already heard of it. I'm kind of the opposite of you at the moment. I am red arrows all around since last week when we talked about it, but it does actually kind of tie in a little bit to what we're talking about. So I've gone for a completely different strategy in this. I'm going aggressive. I'm barely thinking about it. I look at a player. If I want to get rid of them, and there's a player with good features, I'm just getting them in. I will never learn with Trent Alexander-Arnold. I benched him against Man City, and I mean, come on, 2 goals for Christ's sake. I mean, where was that going to happen? But I benched him for that. He got 15 points, so I've hurt there. But I'm thinking about, and you know what? I'm not going to learn from that. I'm going to do it again this week. I'm playing aggressive. He's playing Chelsea away. It's basically him versus, and I've got Alonso at home, so I'm going to go for Alonso. That's my gut feeling, and it's almost like a release because I'm not worried about my rank as much in this because I don't know. I'm not going to have to talk about it on YouTube every week. Is probably the main reason. But one of the things as well is what I talked about earlier, is not going for a decision just because it didn't work out once. So I feel like if my aggressive approach got me to 48. Yes, I'm back down to just inside the top 400, but maybe it can get me back up again. Yeah. So I'm just going to stick with it and just see how it goes. So, yeah, this week I think I've still got a wild card to use, which I probably should have used by now, shouldn't I? And I've still got 2 free transfers this week, so I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that. But I'm going to captain Jimenez this week, home to Aston Villa. Yeah. That's it. I'm not even going to think about it. Bad team. How are you getting on?
Yeah, I've done lots. I got a little red arrow for the first time in about 10 game weeks. So it's been green arrows loads. So I've gone from like 1200 to top 300. So onwards and upwards, and I've just moved down about 10 places or something at the moment. And yeah, I've been doing this sort of like, I don't know, nuanced Dullardinho. I don't know whether there's a strategy for it, but. So yeah, I've been doing this sort of okey cokey with Salah and a premium striker, and it's really works because each one has been getting me like braces each time. I've been captaining them, and I've been mainly doing it for the captain. So the likes of Alexander-Arnold, Alonso, Jimenez, Rashford, they're just going nowhere for me. They're just consistent. Perez as well for Leicester, even though they've got bad fixtures. He may go, but so far, these are just consistent scorers. Keep them. And I looked around, and previously, as a manager in FPL, I would have looked at a player like Salah and said, I'm not getting rid of him. But it actually does pay off if you do it for another player. So I'm not going to... Salah's got 2 bad fixtures coming up. Aubameyang looks good to me. So I might take a hit there and get Traore in.
I've got no Liverpool attack either.
Yeah, I mean,
I've gone for it. It didn't work out so well last week, but
I don't think he's going to be well captained. I don't think I definitely don't want to captain him for a couple of weeks. So it makes sense to me to move him to Traore because Wolves have great fixtures. You just mentioned Jimenez there, so obviously Traore has also got Villa, and meanwhile Aubameyang is at home. I can't remember who to, but I remember thinking I'll have some of that. Bournemouth, and then he's home to Southampton as well. So he's got a lot of good home games coming up. So he's a player I want for a few weeks, and I think I can do without Salah for a little bit and see how it goes. So, yeah, it's going well. I'm enjoying the game as well. I know, David, you're not playing virtual FPL, but obviously your eye on the community. It must warm your heart, really, in the absence of FPL. The community's really rallied around and made lockdown as interesting as it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really nice to see. And as you say, it's a really nice fix for people if they're missing that to be able to play. And what I've really enjoyed is how vigorous everyone's been about kind of analysing it to the same extent that we would normal FPL. So I'm a big fan of the stuff that Top Marks has done with his spreadsheets, analysing the number of attacks that each team's having and number of the attacks that each team are conceding, for example. It means that you can make a lot of the decisions that you need to make with something similar to what you would normally in FPL. So, for example, with the Captain Sensible article or a couple of data tables, Top Mark has obviously gone and created those, and we've got those on our site as well. So yeah, it's really nice to see everybody's ingenuity being shown in not least in Ragaboli for creating the game, which is great, but especially in the way that everybody is playing it as well. It's really good fun to see.
Yeah, and incredible effort, I think, by the community there in all the things they've been doing, and lots going on still, and of course we're all waiting to find out what happens with the season, but that is for another day. But in the meantime, it's a goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
And goodbye from me.
Goodbye all.